welcome. It's our penultimate broadcast for the season and we're doing a fabulous Milan roundup, and I have a fabulous set of panellists from all different fields of fashion who will introduce themselves, starting with you, Jade.
Hello, I'm Jade Parfitt and I'm a model and a presenter.
Hi, I'm Jessica Bumpus and I'm fashion features editor at Vogue.co.uk.
And I'm Hilary Alexander and I'm a freelance fashion writer and consultant.
Jess, you went to all 4 cities. You're
I did.
A real fashion trooper, exhausted. What was your, I know we're going to talk about Milan, but what was your favourite standout city or moment perhaps from the whole?
I don't know, I mean they've all got something different to offer, so I took something away from each that I really liked. I mean New York, I personally love the energy of the city and there's kind of a real gloss to the shows, and it was obviously very wearable because that's kind of what New York's about, the commercial side. London, it did feel like there was like a new mood. There was kind of, you know, we had our Christopher Kanes and our Jonathan Saunders, they've now grown up and graduated, and then with Fashion East we had a lot more of like a rebellious attitude. So I feel like there was, in London we were seeing sort of the new crop, which was nice. Milan, there were some great surprises. Everyone was raving about number 21, Alessandro Dell'Acqua, and also Trussardi. And then Paris, of course, you know, the grandeur of like Chanel and Vuitton, the kind of settings of those shows were just incredible. So.
Do models have favourite cities? Do they have the one where you're like, we all actually just want to walk in the shows in this city because they're more fun? Or does
when I was doing loads of shows, New York was the place because they paid you by the hour. So it's the only place you'd ever be on time. Everyone would be there 5 hours before the show started with sort of 3 books, just to kind of make every last dollar. Other than that, I mean, I always loved doing shows in London because it's my hometown, and I always loved supporting the designers, and particularly coming up when I was doing a lot were designers like Alexander McQueen, Hussein Chalayan, so it was a really exciting moment in fashion in London then.
Definitely. I was wondering, because we talked about this in our London sort of roundup, if we have lost a bit of those kind of, you know, that amazing spectacle of fashion. I guess it's kind of that benefit of hindsight. Everyone's always a little bit nostalgic when they think of shows from sort of 5 or 10 years ago, but have you guys noticed that you know there's less kind of magic? I think that's quite apt when we're talking about Milan.
No, I think more. I thought there was a complete sort of like somebody had wired us into the national grid for London Fashion Week. It was just
I think London Fashion Week's really coming back majorly, and I think that's what's so exciting is we've got so many brilliant designers who are showing again in London because they know that the press that they get here is going to be good enough that they don't have to go to Paris or Milan. So you've got designers like Giles and Christopher Kane and Jonathan Saunders and Roxanne, you know, which really makes for a really strong fashion week. Yeah,
for sure. It's telling that you mentioned that as well, because obviously for the men's, Milan has just lost Burberry to London, which is very exciting. Poor Milan, but good for us. What's the significance of that? Do you think that's... It's really interesting what you just said, given this idea that, you know, like, Milan's always been somewhere, you know, the buyers and the journalists have to go, but do you think we're going to see a point, you know, where London is the one that is the must-have and people start skipping New York or skipping Milan? Or do you think there's always going to be...
I don't think anyone will skip any of them, but I think London definitely has, you know, since it moved to Somerset House, it became much more of a hub. The schedule is like bursting at the seams with designers, almost too much so. And certainly since it turned, like, had its 25-year anniversary, it's just got better and better, and we have sort of snatched designers from different capitals. So I think it's just it's going to grow and grow, really.
And I think having Tom Ford showing, you know, a real live sort of catwalk presentation for the first time, and he chose London, is quite significant.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Milan, because obviously we're here to round up Milan. I know everyone wants to talk about London because it's just more interesting than all the others. Not that I'm biased. But let's talk about what's Milan's identity as a fashion city, would you say? Because you kind of mentioned this at the start, you know, when you ran through the cities you've been to and kind of, you did their little sort of signature vibes. What's Milan's fashion identity?
I guess, well, it's quite glossy, it's quite brash in some ways. Like you're going to see stuff there that's a bit more, I don't know, blingy or ritzy, or I don't know.
Quite overtly sexy.
Yeah, very sexy, very sexy. Yeah, definitely. Like, you know, you look at something like Versace and that's just sexy. A lot of obviously wearable clothes. It's very glamorous and glossed, I would say. I mean, you don't kind of go there to see like the next big thing. You go there to see like established brands who already have their identity, and you kind of know what you're going to get, but that doesn't make it any less interesting, I think.
I think it's telling what you guys mentioning about it being about gloss and about being a bit sexy, because for me it always feels like there's a vibe that Milan is less about, you know, like fashion. It's more about, as you say, it's not about something that's going to be pioneering and new. It is that kind of element of like glamour and beauty. I don't know, would you agree with that, Hilary? What do you think Milan's signature is?
Yeah, I think glamour completely, luxury, and a kind of decadent, we don't care sort of luxury in a way, especially in the use of fur and exotic skins. I think you see it, you know, sort of just, it's so OTT at times. Not that I'm a member of PETA or anything, but it is very, very in your face, especially, you know, when they're doing autumn, winter. But I think there's a lovely soft side, because I always love the way Dolce Gabbana played the intermezzo from Cavalleria Rusticana, and that touched me because I love opera. So there's sort of two sides to Milan, I think.
Well, Dolce this season was incredibly, you know, there was a softness to it. It was incredibly romantic and theatrical. Like, I loved it. I thought it was amazing.
I think what's really nice though is sort of the Milanese designers, they really celebrate Milan and they love being there and they're really proud of their fashion heritage, and that's really nice to see, like obviously with Dolce & Gabbana, but I think you kind of get that as well through Versace, and you know, it just...
There's a real richness to the culture, and that really comes across, I think, in the clothes, doesn't it? You can see with the colours that they use and the fabrics that they use, and they're not shy. I think that's what's so resolutely un-English about it, is that they're just so
not shy.
Delighted to put on some fur and some sequins and to be super glamorous. In a way that doesn't come necessarily completely naturally to us. But I mean, look at these dresses. This is Dolce, isn't it?
Yeah,
and they're so beautiful.
And it's great at the end because they all just paraded out in the red. And I love that because they always do that at the end of their shows, and you're just like always wowed by it.
I don't know, there was something about it being those red dresses this season, because you know, the season before that when they did all that kind of this, you know, the Sicilian potato sacks and kind of crafty stuff, that was gorgeous. But there's something about those red dresses. It was kind of as like what we were saying about like the might of Italian glamour, you know, it was so...
And kind of tapping into the history, like, you know, the colours of sort of frescoes and, you know...
I thought it looked like it could have been costume for one of the series of the Borgias. You know, there was that, you know, the papal sort of cardinal red. And just the absolute luxury and lushness.
I love all this lace as well. It seems to be staying as a feature at the moment.
And the crowns.
Yeah, those are great styling detail.
Yeah.
It's telling, you know, because people often mention that, you know, there's not much particular innovation in Milan, but sometimes it's quite comforting. I think that's one thing that I really like about going to a Dolce show, is you know what you're getting, but it doesn't make it any less exciting. And you want there to be those kind of voluptuous lace pieces. You want there to be that kind of Sicilian pride and that, you know, there's something quite comforting in brands staying true.
I think there's always a very strong theme. You know, they have an inspiration,
for sure.
And they really work it in every conceivable way. So you're not darting from sort of one reference point to another. There's a thread running through, whether it's Renaissance or, you know, English society or the Scottish Highlands or punk. You know, there'll always be this a starting point and a finishing point, and it's all about the theme.
I'm glad you mentioned punk, because punk was kind of everywhere in Milan. And I know that. Like Donatella, Versace, the Vunk, that was quite literal. But also at Fendi, you know, we were looking at the faux hawks, as people have been calling them. Which obviously a lot of people tie to the Met exhibition that we've got coming up. Were you guys glad to see punk on the runway? What was your take on that?
I think it's always fun because we always see it as a real reference to London. So it's always going to be a bit of a compliment to British design. And in fact, I know that Sam McKnight did those hair pieces, so it's quite interesting that they did actually use, you know, British hairdresser to sort of help achieve that look. I love the colours, you know, I think that's really, really good fun.
I think it's really interesting seeing how each capital then interpreted this idea of punk, because in New York there was like Philip Lim, his girls were kind of more sort of streetwise and in packs. It was still had that punk undertone, but like completely glossy and New York wearable. And then great to see sort of Fendi's take. And then of course in London there were, you know, it was more the kind of pleated kilts and like more direct kind of references. But it's quite nice to see how that translates across all four.
And in Milan it was classic, like avert, you know, right there. But I think that was what was kind of really fun about it, is it almost became like spot the punks at each collection. It was such a...
And yet Vivienne Westwood barely referenced punk, and she's
punk through.
She's the godmother of punk, isn't she?
But Vivienne Westwood was also, we were talking about this when we were in Milan, weren't we? Vivienne Westwood she kind of cropped up on a few catwalks, you know.
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
Like completely,
some
all
aspects
of her stuff, yeah, completely. Which is
but she once said to me that she would never ever sort of resurrect her own past.
Oh really?
Or, you know, kind of mine her own archive.
That's interesting with mining your own archive, because
that's what loads of people did this season.
Loads of people, yeah. Like, you know, Prada, everyone's like, it's the greatest hits collection.
Yeah, Christopher Kane as well, Givenchy, there was kind of that tinge,
Let's talk about Prada. I will come back to punk because I want to look at Versace, but let's talk about Prada, because this was, you know, this has been one of those shows that everyone has just kept on talking about. You know, we had Tim Blackson yesterday, and he was like, that was my favourite show. It's been one of my favourite shows for years. You know, he was really singing its praises. And I don't want to say this because I work in digital, but the pictures just don't do it justice. You know, there was something magical about being there, and it was absolutely incredible. What was so strong about Prada this season?
I think it kind of played into that sort of archetypal nature of what you think Prada is. I think,
for sure.
And because it sort of, you know, delved into its own archive, it kind of reaffirmed what you think that brand is. And I think when people think of Prada, that's a very signature kind of aesthetic, and obviously compounded by the fact that last season was so different, and conversely was so signature Prada in the other way, because she tends to do something quite out there and then something more Prada.
Yeah.
But I really personally love the way there's a sort of disheveledness to it, and you've got these, like, I mean, that pink dress is beautiful, the way it's tied at the back, and you know, there are cardigans sort of half undone with then these really prim dresses over the top.
It's quite sensual, isn't it? You can see grown-up women wearing these clothes as well as sort of younger fashion girls.
Which I thought was interesting, because as Jess mentioned, you know, last season it did feel very young in a sense, because it was so kind of like gimmicky in a way. You know, it was an incredible collection, but it was
almost like a Hello Kitty-ness.
It was kind of very very young and very fashion, whereas this felt like something very much outside of fashion.
I think it looked very mucha. I mean, you can imagine pretty much her wearing every single piece that came down the runway. You know, it's the belted waist, the sleeves, you know, the deep décolletage. It's neat and precise, but at the same time hints that there is something going on.
And the casting was interesting. You know, we talked about this in some of our sort of individual show panels about how, you know, there's always this idea with the catwalk presentation that a designer should show something for all elements of a woman's wardrobe and life, but there's also, I found with Prada, its sense of clothes for all aspects of a woman's sort of age, you know, right through from when she's young to when she's older, and that was reflected in some of the models that they were using.
Rather wonderfully, you had Kirsten Owen and Esther de Jong, who you haven't seen on the runway very much, having a real sort of comeback moment and looking amazing, you know, just fitting in so well, not sticking out. I was sort of looking for them because, you know, Kirsten's an old friend of mine, and I was just really pleased to see that she, you know, she looked brilliant in that show. It's a real kind of, you know, keeps that word femme fatale keeps coming back when in regards to this show, but it is very filmic, isn't it?
Completely.
Hitchcock was a reference that kept on cropping up. Although you look at that one on the far left, and that almost looks like a Vivienne Westwood skirt.
There was an element that was very Westwood to this collection. When you saw those bodice, those kind of off the shoulder, the bodice type pieces moving, it looked so Westwood.
Yeah, the big stripes too.
What is it about Prada that everyone, it's a big question, but everyone loves, because it always feels like when you're in Milan, it feels like nothing's quite happened until you go and see Prada show. You know, it's that weird angst you get where you're like, can't really make up my mind about anything, and then you see Prada. Why is she so clever?
I think she's one of the designers that sort of sets the benchmark for the season. There are, you know, there's probably about 10 or so that you specifically look at, and it's like what they do actually does define trends or the mood, and she's definitely one of them.
Who else would you put in that camp? So obviously you've got Marc Jacobs. And
definitely.
You love your Marc Jacobs.
I love Marc Jacobs. And at Vuitton, obviously, what he's doing as well.
Raf Simons.
Dior.
I think Isabel Marant is a big women, fans.
It's interesting you mentioned someone like Isabel Marant, because I'd like to talk about those kind of, you know, those new designers that have popped up that people are, you know, are really excited about and are really sort of focusing on, because that's one thing that I feel is lacking in Milan, is that ability for someone to come along and do something really great. And often you see this in the reviews of some of the younger designers who are trying to sort of build themselves. I'm going to really struggle to pronounce his name now, but Francesco
Scognamiglio.
Yeah, there we go. Thanks, guys. I was really excited. I was like, why have I brought him up? What
and then don't forget Alexandro Palumbo.
Oh gosh, I don't want to try and mention these. But it's one of those things where people often mention that in the reviews in a really kind of in a really sad way, and they say, you know, it's really great yet again, but it's still struggling to find a voice, and it's because there's not enough support for young Milanese talent. Do you think that is kind of, because we don't get people coming along in Milan that will sort of appear and be the next big thing like we saw with Isabel Marant, you know?
I really think that in Milan it's kind of, it is those bigger names, that's the draw card, and that's kind of, and it's so known for that, like you go for your Versace's and your Pradas, and I think for new talent it's better to go somewhere like New York and do something with Milk Studios, or to London, because I really feel like those are the ones that sort of provide those platforms. I mean, there is something in Italy, it's like Alta Moda or Alta Roma, yeah. And that's really supporting kind of new couturiers, but that's kind of a separate thing. So like I went to it and it's fascinating, and it's really nice to see that actually there is some support and they are trying to develop new talent, but it's on a slightly different vein, because yeah, you do tend to think of Milan and Italy as being, they're the stalwarts and that's that. But yeah, I think, I don't know, I just kind of feel like New York and London are probably better serving for supporting new talent, whereas Milan and Paris are much more like, you're a name, you've made it, and that's that.
Is there anyone new in Milan that you're excited about, newish or young? Anyone who's not the big Dolce, Prada, anyone who's really great? Because I'm obsessed with Amit Bernardin, so that's my like disclaimer. Who left Trussardi, so I'm like tragic and really sad. But you know, I thought it was so exciting to see someone with such a clear young vision showing.
Yeah, and he really does. Like I spoke to him every season after his show, and he was really wanted to put like this cool factor, and was taking a lot of inspiration from London and this idea of like his, you know, international woman, and the one thing he kept saying after this show was just like, cool, I wanted it to be cool, and that was, you know, from everything from like a sort of smaller heel to, and just really, and it was a fantastic show, like really fantastic, and I do actually feel like he really nailed it on the head with this one, like 3 seasons in, and he really got it.
And last season was quite wobbly, the women's, you know, a lot of people were like, it's a menswear designer, he's really shoehorning himself into women's wear, he doesn't seem comfortable, and this was just like,
it was fantastic.
I just wanted all of it. Yeah. It was amazing.
It was. I think definitely alongside like number 21, those are the two that people were talking about most, aside from like Alessandro Dell'Acqua, I think is fantastic, and he really got a fantastic balance between the sort of feminine, masculine, boy, girl, which again is like a trend that we've seen all over the capitals. And it was just, again, it just sort of oozed that cool factor, and just was very much the way girls wear thing, and I think that's something we're seeing a lot more of. I mean, there was a lot less evening wear on the catwalks. A lot of the, you know, even with like Prada, those were all like things you could wear, and there was much more, these were actually wardrobe clothes, and it was building on someone's wardrobe as opposed to kind of going too conceptual.
It felt like genuine offerings for, you know, women to actually wear. It didn't feel like this is kind of, that's the thing with evening wears, as much as it's gorgeous to see like something like that at Versace, but this felt like a genuine sort of suggestion.
Anything that you actually want to wear, that is a more exciting form of desire than looking at some sort of sequin spangled thing that you could never wear on a red carpet.
I quite like that young duo, well, they're not that young anymore, Aquilino Raimondi.
Oh yeah.
They were doing Ferry for a while, I don't know if they still are. Yeah. Because they sell in London here at Fenwick, and I bought quite a few dresses. I like their print, but I find that they're very sort of hit and miss. One season you'll think, gosh, that's fantastic. The next season, you know, draw a veil.
They've been going quite sort of Alice in Wonderland of late, I have to say.
But I do like, you know, those crazy ones, Sconomilio and Alexander Palumbo, because they completely just go off on a sort of extraordinary, you know, tack, and really in a way that is almost pantomime at times. But there's a sort of fun element, and it's almost as if, yes, sometimes Milanese designers can let their hair down, but beware of the results.
I think we always have a great show at D Squared purely because it's always just the theatre and craziness of it. It's just, it's hilarious. Like this one was again like 40s femme fatale, but like exaggerated and then some. It's always quite fun.
It was. Yeah, it's funny because with the men's, because it's right at the end of the men's usually, and everyone just waits for it because there's just like naked people everywhere. And, like, you're just like, what is this? It's like a reason to go to Milan.
there's always a girl in a bikini or...
Oh my God, completely.
Yeah, topless.
Sets are always like
the guys all stripped off at the last men's show. They all came out and then took off all their clothes and were just wearing their underwear, and then were like, it was like quite I think
they can only survive in Milan. They're so Italian. It's only the Italians that will still embrace that kind of overt sexiness, you know, lots of fun, high heels, tight skirts, you know, and it's sort of... There's something, you know, I mean, everyone's laughing, but it's kind of fun. It's kind of sweet that those things still exist.
But if you did this in London, you know, like there are Italian like buyers there, you know, who they take it seriously and they see it as like a genuine suggestion of fashion, which I think is great. As you say, you know, you could only do that in Italy.
But it's amazing to think they're Canadian.
Yes.
You know, you don't sort of think of, you know, Canada really as being a hotbed of sort of sexual expression.
Yeah. But they are really talented as well. They're amazing tailors as well.
Yeah, I know.
Actually, you kind of get lost through all the styling. But
it reminds me of that Greek men's underwear designer who used to show in Paris, Nikos.
Oh, okay.
And every season the men would be either monks or it would be Robin Hood or something really just completely bizarre, but with the headgear and tiny knickers, and there would be somebody standing backstage, oiling the bodies and then spraying them. You know, with those things you used to spray houseplants, so that there would rivulets dripping down as they went on stage.
Amazing. Amazing.
All the
Susie and I used to
were
sit
like
in the front row,
flirting with each other. It was so great.
Yeah, they were at the end. Yeah,
the girls that were dressed as boys were kind of like jocking their trilbies at the girls.
That's very funny.
It was quite sweet. Let's talk a bit on, now we've got into the kind of more outlandish designers, let's look at that Versace collection, that Vonk, because that was the kind of word of the season, wasn't it, Vonk? It must have been most tweeted. What did you guys think of this?
You have to be very brave to wear it. It was really about like wearing your sex on your sleeve or not, and just like out there.
I think pop stars, you know.
Like, and it was, you know, it was fierce to the core. Like,
there's
just
a
with all
few
the
dresses here that you could see on the red carpet, for sure.
It was a bit Liz Hurley in safety pin days, wasn't it?
Yeah. Completely.
With upgraded weaponry.
But again, it's that thing of kind of like, why not?
They look like they might be armed.
They are.
Yeah, they don't want to mess with them.
You would not want to mess with those girls.
Actually, Versace.
There's a lot of leather as well, isn't there?
Donatella should do the costumes for James Bond, shouldn't she?
She should.
Yes.
Yeah, she should.
Actually, she would make a mean Bond girl.
But isn't that cool?
Yeah.
What do you think of... it's an interesting one with Versace because I'm really obsessed with Gianni Versace, and I think actually the sort of Versace archive is so exciting and so diverse as well. And Versace is one of those ones where, in a sense, because it's kind of so theatrical at the moment, I think people forget its importance and influence as a house. I don't know if you guys would agree with that, and the way in which it's... And that's no criticism of Donatella. I think what she does is
I think they're some of the ultimate Italian designers. When you think of Italian fashion, you think of Versace and Armani and Dolce, and those are the initial names that come up. And you think about the heritage with all the sort of... I immediately think of the supermodels on the runway, you know, Linda and Naomi, and all sort of walking down together, and that sort of real strong, sexy woman. And I think there are still a lot of elements of that on the Versace runway.
He does do... I mean, Donatella has kept that, I think, strong, sexy, you know, the sort of hint of bondage, cleavage, you know, cutouts and things, which Gianni always did. But at the same time, he was an absolute master printsman. And if you look back through the archive, some of his prints are just completely glorious, and you know, using sort of 25, 27 different colours and patterns, and really there was I remember all these little tutu dresses, you know, remember the little ballerina dresses with bodices in just wonderful colours, and then the scarves and the leggings, and you don't see that sort of aspect of Gianni coming through so much.
Do you think, what do you think about what's happening with Versus? You know, how they've, now obviously Christopher Kane's no longer doing Versus, and you know, they're doing these like little kind of residencies of designers and change that around. Do you think that's a good move for something like Versus? Do you think that would be nice to see different people sort of plunder the archive in a different way? What's kind of your reaction to that? Because obviously we've got Jonathan Anderson doing it first.
I think it'll be interesting because almost doing it like in short residencies takes off a certain pressure of kind of having to make it look exactly like Versus, and it's more the idea of what would you do if you were given Versus. So that I'm excited to see, and also I'm really excited to see what Jonathan does, because his own aesthetic is quite markedly different, and sort of a lot more pared down and industrial and kind of austere, whereas this is more kind of vamped up, and so I think it'll be interesting.
No disrespect to Jonathan whatsoever, but I think one thing is it's going to make it incredibly easy for the press office, because there's so much to write about each season with a different designer, and they don't have to worry about inventing all those screeds of unintelligible sentences to try to explain what the collection's all about.
And it's almost a credit to the archive in a way, you know, that there's so much there for different people to interpret in such different ways. That's what I'm really excited about, you know, to see. And also it'll give a lot of young designers, like somebody like Jonathan who's really coming up, the chance to work at a much more established house, without, like we said, the pressure of that having to be necessarily for the next 5 years. So just coming in and really, you know, getting a completely different experience, and then being able to retreat and come back to his own label with a completely different viewpoint.
Definitely, because like, for example, with Alexander Wang at Balenciaga, obviously it's like when you take on a big mantle, that first collection is always like, there's so many people obviously looking for that, but then it's going to be like 3 seasons in when you actually are able to fuse your own identity with the brands, and you kind of have to show that you get it first, so So who were your real highlights from Milan? Who stood out for... Because there was a lot of talk around Trussardi we mentioned before, but also people like Mani. Who else was the kind of the star players for Milan? Who had a good season? Who had an off season? I really liked Pucci.
I remember we were in the car on the way to Pucci, and just like, I'm really excited.
I like Pucci. And also this time, Peter Dundas raided the archive again to resurrect the Otto print, and then kind of combine it with his sexy stamp, and the hair there was amazing. Everyone was just like, I want the hair like that. I'm a massive fan of it, I have to say. I think he manages to make it sexy and contemporary, and sort of tap into a contemporary market. I also love the coats of Max Mara. Those were just like a hug.
I love the coats at Bottega Veneta. They're beautiful wool. I mean, it's they're just so chic. You know, you want. I genuinely sort of was looking through again last night, thinking, oh my god, I know why I'm looking at this again, because I really love that.
That Bottega collection was interesting though, because for me, I felt like it was. I don't know, it felt like a little bit darker, a little bit more. You know, we were talking about something that was more conceptual than we're used to. I think
it was a lot sharper, and there was sort of a disheveledness to it, like with the frayed hems, and he really experimented with different textures. And I can't remember exactly what it was, but this idea of like a luxury poverty that he was sort of playing with. So that kind of accounted for the sort of straws and the homespunness. But he always does something with the shoulders, but this time it was so very much sharper, whereas before it's just been a lot softer. I mean, he's still very much about, you know, playing to a woman's silhouette, and you know.
And this is interesting because through images, this actually I think comes across a lot softer than it was.
I agree, to see definitely. In real life, it was a lot sharper.
I wasn't there, so I'm just looking online. But
it is beautiful. Absolutely beautiful.
What about Gucci?
I like the feathers at Gucci. Because it was just a kind of lushness, and also some of the prints were like a feather print. Then we saw the feather repeated again and again at Louis Vuitton. And I loved also the chainmail, sort of Joan of Arc at Roberto Cavalli.
I saw you tweeted about
tunics. I just thought they were sensational.
Why did you love Roberto Cavalli so much? Was it just the what?
Well, I'm not a minimalist, so he sort of speaks to the kind of inner gypsy, I guess, in my soul, but there's something unrestrained about him, and I just loved it. I like anything that's sort of slightly tribal. And the beadwork on those tunics, even if you wore them just with skinny, you know, black pants or with black boots, unbelievable. Beautiful workmanship.
You know, this idea, you know, you mentioned kind of I'm not a minimalist, but do you find that kind of that Are you happy that there are still these outlets for this kind of maximalism?
Oh yes.
Because it seems to have kind of fallen out of favour in a sense. You know, if people do something that is kind of tribal but it was interesting to see that, you know, at Givenchy there was that gypsy thing, and it feels like people are a bit more inclined to sort of.
I think we've been having a real sort of minimalist moment, and this whole kind of, you know, Marge and Sandro, the way people have been dressing the last couple of years, it's very much been wardrobe focused. Actually, you can wear it, but now I feel like people are getting a bit bored with that. So it's nice to bring back in these elements, and there was like a nod more towards vintage references, you know, with the like Hitchcock and femme fatales. So I think we're going to start actually being able to explore fashion history a bit more and enjoy all the things of it.
And look at YSL doing grunge.
Yeah.
I mean, not entirely appropriate perhaps for the YSL catwalk, but then even Saint Laurent himself, you know, did that whole sort of biker left bank leather look, you know, in the late 60s. So there's a history of rebellion, you know, within the house. So perhaps Henny wasn't that far off the mark.
So did you like the Saint Laurent collection, Hilary?
Some of it. But for me, always the original grunge collection that Marc Jacobs did for Perry Ellis is the one. You know, the striped T-shirt and the floral tea dress. You know,
you kind of think, why would anyone try and touch grunge again? It's always going to be done better. It's really interesting, actually, that we mentioned this kind of like the vintage revival a little bit, and how designers are looking at you know, moving away from that kind of slick, quite difficult minimalism, which makes luxury seem very exclusive. Because it got me thinking about, you know, what is luxury and how do we interpret luxury? Because we mentioned at the start of the discussion about Milan being very glamorous, and I think one part of my brain identifies, you know, with that perfect handbag. But a lot of the design that we're actually seeing this season, it felt more considerate. It felt more in tune to people being able to pick pieces from their wardrobe that maybe went back sort of 10 years and mix it with something else, and it felt less about this kind of icy, strong, sort of rich luxury. I don't know if you guys sort of thought that a bit, because that's what I found interesting with Prada. It was quite like do it yourself, you know, like pull something out you've already got, and that feels like more considerate design, especially for the moment.
It feels a bit more realistic as well, doesn't it?
There's definitely, I think people are dressing more realistically and designing.
Natural times. I think that people are sort of investing more heavily in that sort of one perfect coat or handbag as an update, instead of necessarily, you know, going out and buying 5 new entire outfits every season.
For sure.
Which I think can only be a good thing.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it, you know, what people interpret luxury as well, because I always end up thinking about that quite a lot in Milan, because you think, you know, is it like a perfect coat that you can wear with your Topshop jeans and trainers? You know, what is it that's kind of luxury now? Because we talked a lot on these panels about texture, and people see texture as luxury. It really sounds like we're under attack. I'm actually terrified. But let's just keep going. It's like we're about to get bombed. What is it?
Don't say that.
It's really horrible. It's like we're in World War II. Anyway, sorry. But yeah, what do you think? What do you think sort of women interpret luxury as? Like, have you noticed a change in how sort of what the Vogue reader is after? Does she see?
Well, I think luxury is kind of something that's kind of in a state of flux anyway. So obviously we've gone in the past through the kind of it bag era, then it kind of went to shoes, which, I mean, both of those things in themselves are like accessible ways to tap into that sense of luxury from that house. But yeah, I really think it's something that moves and changes. But you're right, I think it's really interesting, the idea that people associate it with texture, and then perhaps that's why we're now moving back to that, because actually it is a luxury to have sort of the texture back in our lives and these kind of vintage references, where before everything's just been so austere. But I definitely think it's, you know, kind of like a luxury to have like some of these collections that are just completely like wearable, and as you say, they kind of, you don't have to sort of spend thousands and thousands, you can just rummage back in your own wardrobe.
Do you think it's Donatella dropping in? Coming down on a golden rope.
It's our reporter out in the street circling London. We were talking about kind of minimalism, so let's talk a little bit about Jill Sander. I'm interested, what did you guys think of this? It was firstly having Jill back at her own house. Let's talk about that first.
Well, that's lovely, isn't it? I mean, everyone breathed a bit of a sigh of relief, just because it's such a hard design shoes to fill, and I think it's just nice to see someone who, back at her own level, producing a really quality show, I thought.
And she has such a wonderful appreciation of fabric, and developing new sort of fabrications, which she seemed to do a lot of in Japan. And that was always, you know, the fascinating thing about her. You'd see a shirt and you'd think it was cotton, and then you'd discover that it had metallic threads woven through it, or nylon, or, you know,
and that's very current now, you know, people love doing that tricksy thing where you're like, oh, I thought it was leather and it turns out it's silk, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It feels...
I think this collection was, she's more feminine with this one. There was, you know, softer shapes. It was less austere, but actually interesting going back to the luxury thing, because obviously there are the gold bits on, and she was saying that was kind of a way that you could then, you know, have some, like, wear some gold on your sleeve and kind of tap into that idea of luxury. So, and again, but done in like a really minimalist way. It was really clever, really beautiful.
It did feel softer, this collection. I think definitely it's interesting you mentioned that. So what are the big, I hate the word trends, but what are the kind of takeaways from this season? You know, how will we all be dressing based on what we saw in Milan?
I think a lot of, you know, Hitchcock references. Certainly Gucci amped and vamped that up as well, and you know, you can attribute it to Prada as well. And then, you know, in its kind of more exaggerated form, a bit at T squared.
And that big oversized coat, you know, rounded shoulders.
Balenciaga shoulders. And
definitely, we're seeing a lot of that everywhere.
Quite minimal makeup, I think. And, you know, hair, you could go really wild. We did see a bit of that at Bottega with the sort of big hair and the red lips, but that's essentially it. If you're looking at the makeup, obviously Jill Sander here, it's very pared down.
But Prada with that
Prada was just very simple hair, quite grungy hair, you know, compared to the kind of big fur coats and everything that they were wearing.
Fur bags.
Definitely.
Fur bags.
Milan was obviously
Can we talk a little bit about fur, because that's one thing that came up. You know, of course you expect to see fur in Milan for autumn winter, but there was so much fur this season. I know obviously you expect it at someone like Marni, but Fendi and Marni have really kind of gone to town on the fur. Why is that? Is this going back to the luxury discussion we were having? It's just something very sort of obvious and tangible that people can...
I think there's always fur on the catwalk, especially Milan for autumn winter. And Fendi, you know, kind of, it was almost like a joke, like we are the fur house and we do it best. And, you know, I think Carl had written something about Fendi
is fur.
And I think they're just very unapologetic, you know, and I feel like that's kind of what Milan Fashion Week's a bit like, you know, unapologetic is a really good word for it, because they just are ostentatious, and they are, you know, we're a fur house, everything is going to be fur, the hair is fur, the bags are fur, you know, and it's, you know, if I've worked with Carl, but you know he's finding this quite amusing, you know, and it's very chic at the same time. But
the sunglasses had fur.
They did, absolutely everything was garnished in fur.
Yeah.
I mean, again, incredibly un-English. You know, we're all terribly embarrassed if there's one fur coat in a show and nobody wants to talk about it in the press afterwards, and it's all very, you know...
I think you've really crystallised it for us. It's English, it's just like embarrassed and apologetic, and Milan.
But we're not embarrassed. Because we're very out there with our designs, actually. I'd say that we push the limits more than they do in Italy, but not when it comes to
modesty, isn't it?
We're modest, and there's a humility.
Well, except for Anna.
Except for Anna.
Yes. Who's totally out there when it comes to fur. I think perhaps there's I wouldn't go so far as to call it fear. I think caution, and people are scared of being labelled or insulted or sworn at, or perhaps being crossed off Stella McCartney's Christmas card list.
Clearly not in Milan though. Everyone's very happy. Great. Well, thank you so much. I really feel like we should wrap up on that amazing note of Milan being unapologetic, because I don't think we're going to be able to describe this season better, because it was an unapologetic, confident season.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant.
Fabulous.
Thank you.
Let's all go take cover now.
Yes. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks.